Welcome to the GCI Conference Center. Please enter your app. Thank you. Please stand by. If you are the chairperson, press the star key now. Your conference will begin when the chairperson arrives. Please wait. You will now be placed into conference. There are 13 participants in the conference.
This is your pre-meeting reminder to please mute your phones if you're on the phone line. It makes everything easier for everyone.
All right, good morning. I'm going to call this meeting of the Alaska Marijuana Control Board to order. It's November 13th. We are on the ancestral territory of the Athabascan people. We're in the 3rd Judicial District of Alaska at the Job Center in Midtown Anchorage. So, roll call, please.
Mr. Springer?
Here.
Mr. Schulte?
Here.
Mr. Jaime?
Here.
Mr. Miller?
Here.
Mr. Jones?
Here.
Ms. McConnell? Here. Ms. Wilson? Here. And I am Ms. Martin.
Okay, thank you. All right, approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
Mr. Chair, if I could
Yeah,
note
go ahead.
that there was an addendum to the agenda to add a retail store application that was found to be complete before the agenda deadline, but was missed being added to the agenda.
The conference is now in listen-only mode.
For Green Raven.
All right, thank you, Director. With that, do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Jones, or second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Schulte. Any additions besides the addendum go on here? Note that we're going to get up to tab 15 and probably break for lunch. Part of this is dependent on Ms. Wilson, who is our new board counsel. On her schedule, she's got a little bit of a court date this morning, so we will dance around the schedule with the board's forbearance. Okay, all those in favor of approving the agenda signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we've got an agenda. Approval of the September 11th through 13 minutes up in Nome, where the weather was so nice. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Any discussion on those minutes? Hearing none. All those in favor of, I'm typing my password in here, all in favor of approving the minutes of the September 11th through 13th meeting, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, same thing on the October 22nd. That was a short meeting that we had. Is there a motion to approve the meeting of the October 22nd meeting?
So moved.
Okay, motion by Mr. Jones. Second by Mr. Schulte. Any discussion on those? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor of approving the October 22nd meeting minutes, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, now I'll introduce Joan Wilson. She is our new board counsel after, I can just say summary transfer of Harriet Milks from our service and the service. So, Ms. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you stated, my name is Joan Wilson. Harriet is a colleague of mine, and I'm pleased to be stepping into her shoes and to serving the board to the best of my ability. For purposes of my discussions with you this morning, I'd like to just generally and ask for your comments. In your roles as board members, you are subject to the Executive Ethics Act, as am I and a number of other state employees, and as such, we need to be aware of any potential conflict you have, any potential change in position that might be influencing anything before the board today, any ex parte conversations. So if the board has anything to declare, I think this is the time. Is that correct, Mr. Chair?
Either now or if a particular item comes up.
Very good, sir. And then lastly, for purposes of today's meeting, I do request that you turn off your cell phones to avoid any ex parte contact.
All right, thanks, Ms. Wilson. So, Mr. Jones, anything to report?
No change.
Mr. Miller?
No changes.
Mr. Jaime?
No changes.
Mr. Schulte?
No changes.
And I'm the same. As I said, it's possible that if something comes up on the agenda, then we'd also have an opportunity to express a potential conflict or contact.
And thank you, sir. And as you mentioned, I do have a trial before Judge Wolverton, so I will be leaving you at some point today. My assistant is here, and if a matter comes up, he will be able to get to me quickly. Thank you for your indulgence. I had this prior to taking on this assignment, and I very much appreciate you taking my calendar.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you. Okay, brings us to public testimony. We have a list of people that want to testify, or we're just going to go by show of hands. Okay, first come, first serve.
First, I'll check.
That's the sign-in list. That's not, I don't think there's a public testimony list. Hey, come on up, introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Marijuana Control Board. My name is Caleb Saunders, last name Saunders, and I'm the CEO and one of the licensees for Green Jar. I've been at this since the inception of the Alaska cannabis market, but prior to it all, I worked in the oil fields of Prudhoe Bay doing remedial down work and operations for the wells, as well as a crane trainer teaching others how to do safe operations and about the rules and regulations and how they're expected to know and follow those. I was often disappointed with the oil field's culture of dishonesty when it came time to follow the rules and regulations. I was once left in awe after being told behind closed doors there's a difference between a good operator and an honest one, and when I was unwilling to hide an incident. It was always frustrating to me to be given policies and procedures, then arbitrarily told those can be and should be ignored if I wanted to be an all-star at my job. During the metric training that happened in Anchorage in October, I experienced a metric trainer making claims that were outside the regulatory system. He went so far as to give directions that were specifically against how our regulations are written on receiving products. He stated that everything he was saying came directly from AMCO and enforcement. His level of misinformation, however, was appalling. We were also asked to do many things that are not regulation directly, but are soft regulations, as they are simply made up of requirements by metric. As an example, in their training supplement that you guys have in your packet, under the transportation, directly misquotes Regulation 3AAC 306.730, and then uses the misquoted regulations to set up a strange set of arbitrary rules that licensees are expected to follow, because everything in metric is regulation. This training supplement is not even a public document that everyone has access to. It's no wonder that we are having so many issues with the metric side of our industry when the training is more likely to cause an NOV than to prevent one. I do not want to find myself back in an environment where I have no idea what is truly expected of me, what is written, because what is written in regulation is not what I'm being told to do. It was unacceptable for me when I was in the oil field, and I am unwilling to accept it now in the cannabis industry. Those in the industry that prove through multiple NOVs that they are unwilling to follow the rules should receive monetary punishment. As it stands now, the NOVs that come across the board never result in any type of action from the board. Frozen Buds received only one NOV that I can find in any of the documents before it received a $500,000 fine and was shut down. Enforcement needs the support from the MCB in finding these actors that are not following statute and regulations time and again. It would, however, be unfair not to hold metric to the same standards that licensees and the state are being held to. It is unfair to all licensees who set up their businesses to operate within the regulations if other licensees can simply ignore the regulations without impunity. It is also unfair to expect that those businesses that are set up to operate within the regulations to start following arbitrary rules that exist outside of the state and regulation. The statute and regulations are requirements for all parties to follow, not just the licensees. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Mr. Saunders. Any questions for Mr. Saunders? Go ahead, Mr.
I
Julian.
do have one. Mr. Saunders, you mentioned that there was a transportation regulation that had been misquoted and was in our board packet.
So in the board packet, there's, under the metric issues, there's a Alaska supplemental, and down on there, page 53, if I remember correctly, there is transportation. It directly quoting that one, but when you go to it, it's misquoted. There's language that's in there, there's language that's not in there, and there's other parts of transportation that are inside retail and manufacturing that it just simply ignores. So to just ignore some of it, make up some, and then just kind of go, seems kind of arbitrary to me when we have regs that tell us what to do.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Thank you.
Hey, Caleb, you want to give us a copy of your testimony there for the record?
Sure.
Thank you. Come on up. Introduce yourself to us.
Good morning. My name is Tina Smith, and I'm speaking today on behalf of the AMIA Board. We sent in public comment on some general issues, and we and our members have encountered over the past 2 years. We've decided to divvy up the topics up between board members to put on the public record. This first topic is about AMCO's inefficient bureaucratic systems. AMCO staff have told licensees that the wait for review to change in forms is 2 to 3 weeks when the agency is fully staffed. Approval can take longer. Not all changes require the review. Changes are needed to improve business operations, and their quick approval is a key part in increasing trust, efficiency, and compliance in this cannabis industry. The AMI urges AMCO to create and maintain comprehensive public database of all approved and unapproved manufactured products. Such a database would be extremely helpful for licensees. Some are concerned about consistencies and approvals of similarly manufactured products. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Any questions for Ms. Smith? You're suggesting a database of approved products, which we have, and unapproved products, you're saying take applications and pull the information out of those and make a database of for products that haven't been approved yet?
That have been approved, so that we can see
we have that.
Well, and the ones that are coming up to be approved for approval, so that we can see that the consistency across the board for all the different, because we've seen that certain approval processes have different steps that are being taken, different questions that are not consistent across the board.
I mean, maybe it's a function of the application that's submitted, but, okay, thank you. Mr. Kerrigan.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Mr. Springer. Good morning to the board, by the way, and welcome to Ms. Wilson. I haven't had a chance to speak in front of Mr. Jaime before either, but good morning to the board. I'm picking up where Tina speaking on behalf of the AMIA Board of Directors. My name is Kerry Kerrigan. I'm the Executive Director of the Alaska Marijuana Industry Association. AMCO's most common form of communication with licensees is through the notice of violations, which the agency now seeks to monetize with an egregious fine schedule. Business owners have been told by the agency that it is solely their responsibility to be up to date on regulations and agency expectations. However, AMCO is not forthcoming with this information. Audio of the MCB meetings has been requested several times by our members, but they've been told the audio isn't available. We found out at the October 3rd Alcohol Beverage Control Board meeting that those recordings actually are available, so why is the audio not being posted to the website so that the public can access it? As we've all learned, it's not enough to know the regulations. Licensees must also understand how those regulations will be interpreted and the intent behind them. It's impossible without timely access to all the relevant documents and meeting recordings. If enforcement wants licensees to be compliant, then timely communication is important. What does it accomplish to walk through a licensed premises only to notify the licensee of minor violations a month later? The MCB was provided with details of the 12 emails we believe were sent to all licensees in the first 9 months of 2019. If AMCO's short list of communication with licensees is an indication of anything, it's that the agency has no apparent priorities or guiding vision on how to regulate cannabis so that the consumers are safe and licensees are compliant at all times with the regulations and competitive against the unregulated market. Thank you for the time to speak.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Kerrigan? Your question about transparency in regulations. Obviously, not every licensee can come to a board meeting, but I think a lot of them listen to the board meetings.
I think that's that is a little bit of a
We don't
stretch.
have 300 people listening, obviously.
Well, the audio quality of the recordings of what you hear online when you sit, because for the last 2 meetings I've sat on the other end and tried to listen to it, and it's really difficult, especially when I know that there are different systems within the state.
I understand that, but I just am wondering, did you say that our regulations process is less than transparent?
To the extent that we are unable to go back and research and find the information that we need that we feel relevant to being able to interpreting the regulations, yes.
Okay, all right. Thanks, Mr. Kerrigan.
Yeah.
I've got a question. Mr. Kerrigan, I'm looking at the letter that you previously sent in, that was in our marijuana mailbox. And in there's a reference, you identify, a number of communications. None of these emails are intended to communicate changes made to regulations. Some only clarify interpretation of existing regulations. In the body of this email or this letter, there's one bulleted item says the TSA requests marijuana transporters arrive at the airport 2.5 hours ahead of scheduled departure. And then it goes on to say marijuana transported as checked baggage. So I assume this is an example of.
Yeah, yes. That letter is in reference to the trying to get to the airport 2.5 hours ahead of time to get through TSA, which nobody ever had a problem with. But part of that, I understand from talking with James Holscher, was in direct reference to the fact that it was tourist season. And so that was part of what that was in reference to. They had wanted, the TSA had made a request through AMCO to make sure that there was enough time to get through and to make sure that the people who are transporting, licensed, manifested product could get through also without it being kind of balled up.
So this may be a little off topic, but is it your impression through your communications that TSA is pretty much on board with what we're doing here?
Yeah.
They're pretty much accepting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
As long as the proper paperwork is.
As long as it's manifested and done through channels and they know what's coming through, they're good. I haven't had anybody have any problem.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks for carrying.
Okay.
Line up, introduce yourself.
Good morning. My name is Trevor Haynes, Vice President of AMIA Executive Board. First, I want to thank the MCB members for their service. I'm going to continue from our Executive Director's comments and discuss heavy-handed and non-responsive enforcement. Many licensees have told the AMIA that they are afraid of self-reporting mistakes because doing so will almost certainly result in a violation. Similarly, licensees are often hesitant to seek clarification from the agency for fear it might result in a violation or investigation by enforcement. Licensees who do inquire about particular issues often wait days or weeks for response. Some receive incomplete responses or no response at all. We've heard reports of licensees receiving a phone call from AMCO staff with a response, but AMCO then refusing to formalize that response by communicating it via email. Some degree of consideration for a licensee that self-reports a low-level violation should be standard practice. For example, documented warnings would suffice in many cases. AMCO should review the most common and least harmful types of violations and find ways to ensure future compliance through education. A violation is a severe way to deal with the most first-time compliance issues. We've also heard from licensees who feel that a few AMCO employees treat cannabis businesses as inherently criminal in nature. If licensees are going to be treated like criminals and subject to interrogation, then they should also be read their rights and allowed counsel. All of these issues create a dynamic that is counterproductive to the goal of a transparent and regulated cannabis industry. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Any questions? So, as far as what you just said about being treated like criminals, you're aware that AMCO's enforcement actions, whether they're writing an LV or making a phone call, are civil matters. They're not criminal matters. They're not subject to prosecution in court. So to suggest that that's the case is maybe not exactly right. And the comment about they'll get a phone call in response to an inquiry, but then the AMCO staff refuses to formalize the response. I guess there's two ways to look at it. You could either say, here's my email them the question and say, could you please respond by email? Or, if a licensee is talking to them about a matter that affects their business, the licensee would be taking notes while they're talking to them. That was just my thought when I read this in the letter here.
Yeah, and I just want to make clear that these are issues that, as an industry association, our members are bringing to us, and in turn we want to bring to you. And we're not going to talk about individual situations.
All right, thank you.
Okay, I have a question. So, as you mentioned, you're here representing an industry association. Do you feel that these individual licensees feel that they have the latitude, the opportunity to bring these issues before the board or to the AMCO office individually, or do you think that they would feel that they're putting themselves at risk by doing so?
I think there's an effort being made on both sides. I think it would probably depend on the individual that you talk to. I think some individuals would certainly say that is not the case, but there's instances where the communication is good. These are some examples where it's not good.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Go ahead.
Esteemed members of the board, I'm Leif Abel. I will be continuing where Trevor left off, speaking for the AMIA board. I'd like to discuss some regulatory inconsistencies that businesses have experienced. Interpretation of regulation is a critical issue for the AMIA for many reasons, obviously just business survival. There are numerous cases of questionable interpretations of regulations on the part of AMCO and enforcement that do not allow for public comment or your board's vetting process. There have been cases where something is not specifically allowed in regulation and was treated by AMCO as if it were prohibited. We disagree with this approach. AMCO has requested adjustments to metric, which the industry believes amounts to de facto regulation changes that once again didn't go through the vetting process of your board. Licensees should be able to expect that the fields of entry metric requires are based on approved Alaskan regulations. Anything less increases the chance of a preventable violation. Anything more amounts to unvetted regulation. The state's tracking system for cannabis may be administered by a private entity, but that entity is under contract with the state of Alaska. Licensees and staff deserve to know the mechanism for monitoring and reviewing changes to metric. In the future, we expect metric trainings to be informed by Alaska regulations, statutes, and common sense. There was a tremendous amount of concern after recent training events in which attendees were given inaccurate information about Alaska regulations by metric trainers. Many mid-sized and larger cannabis businesses have to employ someone full-time just to deal with metric? Does AMCO have any one employee dedicated to ensuring Alaska's version of metric is effective and accurately reflects regulatory requirements? We believe industry seed-to-sale experts should be consulted when AMCO reviews its contract with metric. And by that I mean licensees in the state that operate that system every day, because we know how it works and we know what we have to do in it. I find when I speak to Metric Helpline, they understand their system that they built way less than my team does, and usually we can't get any help from them at all. We believe industry, said that already. That's all I have. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and I appreciate everyone's hard work.
Right, thanks, Mr. Abel. Questions, comments? Go ahead, Mr. Lee.
I have a question. I'm not sure if this is for Mr. Abel, but I'll address it to staff or to yourself. Is a group, a focus group, a committee, a body that licensees can participate in that allows them to provide informal input on how AMCO is functioning?
Through the chair, Mr. Schulte, not in Alaska. In some other states, they have set up metric user groups, and that's something we've discussed, but we haven't had the resources to arrange for that.
Okay, thanks. Because I'm thinking, I'm just in reading some of the material that I have and some of our testimony today and in past meetings, it occurs to me that an opportunity here might be to establish such a group, not even limited to metric, but to this industry and enforcement and regulation as a whole, where staff and enforcement and licensees can get together informally and have a constructive conversation about how this industry is being managed. Just a thought for future discussion. Thanks, Mr. Abel.
Yeah, and I got a question, Director. And we've heard a couple of comments that metric during trainings has been giving out information that is problematic. Does anybody from the staff attend, or has anybody recently attended metric trainings, and do we have a way to audit that training against the regulations?
Mr. Chair, staff did not attend the metric trainings. I am aware of at least one piece of information that I know was given out that was inaccurate and inconsistent with a previous metric bulletin. I am discussing, there's been some leadership changes at metric, and I am discussing with the sort of new head of, what his title is, about how to improve knowledge of Alaska's regulations before the next training. And one thing that I have discussed with our enforcement staff is ensuring that whoever is sent for the next training actually goes through the training with the staff ahead of time, so that the staff can ensure that the information that metric is providing to the licensees is accurate.
Okay, good. And I can't defend anything that metric is doing that's screwing up licensees.
I would like to make a comment. I was going to wait until the end of the public comment period, but I did attend a metric training. I attended two classes. The first class was horrible. The instructor was dismissive, combative, to be quite honest with you. He didn't know there was a board member in the training, so I had a conversation with him after the training and requested that his supervisors attend the second and third class that day. I did attend the second class, and I will tell you it was much different than the first. But it is a huge disappointment. It was called advanced training, but the stuff that they were teaching, I would say, was out of order, wouldn't have helped a new licensee, and it definitely didn't help a licensee who has been in metric for more than 6 months. So there was nothing advanced about it. I do think we need to get a users group developed. Maybe we only have one staff member or one person from enforcement attend, but I do think there be multiple members from the industry. It was a huge disappointment. I tell the instructor that. So I'm hoping to see some improvements here in the near future.
Okay, great. Yeah, so, and I think maybe during the director's report, we'll see some direction about trying to set up a user group. Thanks. Okay, let's, I I know we got a room full of people. Is there anybody on the phone?
The conference is no longer in listen-only mode.
Public testimony on matters that are not on the agenda, and are not pending regulations. Is there anybody out there on the phone? Okay, I don't hear anybody jumping out.
The conference is now in listen-only mode.
Yes.
My name is Dave Lanning, Lanning. I'm the manager and part owner of Arctic Bakery in Fairbanks, license 1600. My home address is 4365 Vista Way in Fairbanks. Last week I filed a complaint with the Ombudsman Office against the lack of adequate notice for submitting new products for review at this meeting. And I was disappointed to learn that my applications and my MJ16s were not included. I was told that there were 30 people who didn't make the cutoff, and I was number 19. And I was stunned yesterday when I picked up the agenda and found out that there were 2 new products approved. That is, new product applications to be reviewed at this meeting. So of the 32 apparent people who applied to have new products, only 2 have met the requirements for this meeting in time. And so my complaint is about the question of whether the staff is giving adequate notice to be included in this review meeting. I do not believe they have. And so, for those people who would like to ask me any questions about this process, I'm here to answer them. That this is not the right way to do business. It's absolutely unacceptable, and we are very unhappy with it. It costs us a lot of money to apply for this. I spent $1,250 that I won't see again. I spent probably 200 man-hours with my team to develop these products and to make sure they met the requirements of the board and the regulations. And I get a simple little notice that I wasn't in time. But even though I did meet the deadline, the posted notice. So please, if you have any questions, let me know.
I'm not sure whether since you have filed a complaint with the Ombudsman, it's really appropriate for us to be asking you questions about this right now. You know, I'd be more inclined to wait and see what the Ombudsman has to say. I read the complaint. I think the other board members got it, and I don't know whether we. Go ahead, Ms. Wilson.
The Ombudsman's process is a separate process. He or she will give advice to the board, but I think if the board has questions, they can certainly ask it of the individual.
Well, in that case, then go ahead, Mr. Schulze.
I have some questions. Thanks, Mr. Lanning. So you have some products that you want to be able to sell either through your own store or through other retailers?
We're manufacturers.
Okay. So you want to manufacture some products and sell them through other retailers. So when did you submit that material to the AMCO office?
2 days ahead of the deadline.
Okay. And was that posted 2 days ahead, or was it hand-delivered, or can you describe that process?
We delivered them by email, and we delivered a check by hand.
Okay. And that was 2 days before, what was the deadline? October 25th? Okay. Okay, so you're saying that around October 23rd, you submitted the material and the check, and then you were told that it was not received in time, so it wouldn't be on the board.
That's correct.
Agenda. What reason was given for that?
They didn't have time to review it. So apparently they had time to review 2 people, but not 32 people. So, in my opinion, there's either some incompetence here, or there's some malfeasance, or there's a deliberate attempt to prevent new products from reaching the market.
Do you have other products that have been approved prior?
Absolutely.
How many approximately, do you know?
I don't know. We've gone through several iterations, 8. We've probably had 15 or 20 approved. We know a lot of them.
Okay. Are these concentrates, edibles, too?
Edibles, concentrates. mostly edibles.
Okay, thanks. I don't think I have any further questions.
Any other, yeah, good, sorry.
I actually have a question for Director McConnell. Are these numbers accurate?
Through the chair, Mr. Jaime, I can't answer that question. I don't, if there's a problem, I'm not tracking the influx of applications. We do review things in the order in which they are received. So submitting something 2 days before a board meeting deadline in order to be reviewed and any corrections be made is actually, it's unlikely that anything would ever get reviewed and found to be complete within 2 days because, again, we review things in the order in which they are received, and if there are 19 people ahead of this gentleman, then there were 19 applications that came in ahead of his.
That begs the question, Ms. McDonald.
Hey,
When
hold
is
on,
it a
sir.
good
Hold on.
deadline? I'm
That
sorry.
was gonna be my next question, actually. Has there been any discussions about adjusting the deadlines?
Through the chair, Mr. Jaime, so the board meeting deadline has to find that balance between not requiring things so early that it's unreasonable to the applicants versus not requiring things so late that we can't get the packets ready and out to the board in time for review. We do our best to get things to you a week before the board meeting. I know that sometimes things come to you later than that, but we do our best to get the information to you a week ahead of the board meeting so that you can review. And the deadline for things to be found complete is a week and a weekend before that. So that's basically a week for me and my staff to write the memos that often come with these things and organize the packets and get everything put together. So sure, we could add more upfront time, but then we're telling people, oh, for a board meeting, you have to get something in maybe a month ahead of time, and that doesn't always feel reasonable either. So it's a balance, and I'm not sure that we ever make anybody happy in picking that date.
Question for the director. So, the staff resources and timing and so forth has been a recurring theme really since the start of this entire venture. What types of material that comes before the board take the most time for staff, and what types take the least time for staff?
Yeah, so that kind of depends on what timeline you're looking for. A lot of it, so applications for new licenses can take a lot of time. That's because the documents are substantial. I think everyone here that's applied for a license knows there's a lot that you have to submit, and we have to look at every piece of it. So those do take time, but as far as the items that are sort of similarly sized, I will say that products take a substantial amount of time to review because we have to review not only the processes that go into them, but the ingredients and review them for how we understand that the board's interpretations are, which I think we'll be discussing a little bit later in the meeting. But they do take a lot of staff time compared to how long the documents are. And then, of course, the newer applications, so the on-site consumption applications, take a substantial amount of staff time right now because they're so new, and we're trying to make sure that we review them accurately.
Okay, thanks. And just a follow-up to that, is there any priority given to certain types of licenses, like new applications versus renewals, products versus on-site consumption endorsements?
Through the chair, Mr. The board did direct us to prioritize transfer applications over new applications. Other than that, no, we review things first come, first serve. I know that there's been some testimony about doing the easy things first, but if we do the easy things, we'll never get to the hard things, and that's not really fair to the licensees who submit more complicated applications. So if the board wants to direct us to change our priorities, we'll be happy to follow that direction. But other than prioritizing transfer applications over new applications at this time, we continue to operate on a review.
And one more. I realize that the AMCO office is both alcohol and marijuana. Am I correct in my understanding that some staff is dedicated to alcohol, some dedicated to marijuana, some involved with both industries?
That's generally correct. For the licensing staff, we have 5 licensing examiners. One is in her third week of employment because Ms. Sawyer, our longtime experienced marijuana examiner, recently moved over to the regulation specialist position. So we have 2 staff who are dedicated to reviewing marijuana applications. We have 2 staff dedicated to alcohol. This new person is being trained on alcohol renewals. We are just starting in on our alcohol renewal period, and we get, we sent out over 900 alcohol renewal applications. So that floating person, when alcohol renewals are finished, one of the dedicated alcohol people will be trained on marijuana, and then he'll be that floating person.
All right, thanks. I have another question, but I'm going to save it for later.
Okay, so Mr. Lanning, in your package to the Ombudsman, you include an email from Marijuana Licensing. Good morning, Dave. Here's the link to the MJ16 from our website, and this is dated October 23rd. Got the address. We do accept checks for the fee. Just so you are aware, there are only 2 of us reviewing marijuana applications for the entire state, and we have many applications in the queue to be reviewed. It is highly unlikely that we will be able to review something that is submitted on Friday, the November board meeting being that Friday is the deadline. However, it would be moved to the queue to be reviewed in the order in which it was received. Thank you for your patience and understanding. So, you were notified that there was a good likelihood that your applications might not be reviewed in time for this meeting.
If it got there on Friday.
How long do you think it takes to review a product application?
I don't have a clue, and it's not my problem. My problem is getting it in on time, on the deadline, and we made the deadline. And so I expect that if I make the deadline, it will be reviewed and at the meeting. Now, I want to point out one thing, sir. I went through the Ombudsman office to give the board and the staff and the legal team an honorable way to negotiate this, rather than go directly through the court system. This is a big deal. You should use this opportunity to do the right thing. Thank you.
Okay, I'll just say that the right thing is for the legislature to give us some more money for some more staff, and it'd be nice if the industry and licensees would
Maybe you should reduce the number of regulations so you have more time.
With that, anybody else to testify?
Hello. My name is Lacey Wilcox. I serve as the president of the Marijuana Industry Association. First, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to address the board. This last several years have been incredible in many ways. We have laughed, we have cried, we have argued, and we have agreed. The compromises that have resulted in some cases have been the foundation for some of the most effective rules surrounding our industry. We thank you for the volunteer time you have given, and only hope that going forward, the spirit of collaboration grows and the trust among licensees, operators, regulators, and enforcement strengthens. You have heard from the AMIA on several specific concerns. We are eager to participate with you in finding resolution to some of these issues. I want to recap some of the big takeaways that we are hoping for here. We urge a clear effort be made to establish robust, meaningful working groups on issues that are complex and impact businesses such as transportation, testing, packaging, advertising, and violation schedules. We perhaps more than anything hope for recognition that the industry is comprised of hardworking Alaskans, with few exceptions, who perhaps more than any other sector are all in and stand ready to work with regulators to create a sustainable and fair business environment. In that vein, those dedicated entrepreneurs are asking for respect and courtesy from our regulators and wish that the days of being treated like a criminal can finally end. And lastly, but certainly not least important, would be an effort to better utilize the available tools for communication to licensees, meaning more transparency with board meetings, timely meeting minutes, audio archives, guidance documents, efficient teleconference providers, clear AMCO advisories, and an archive of metric bulletins. When communication is lacking and when guidance isn't easily available, mistakes happen. When mistakes happen, a trusting industry to regulated relationship could benefit from self-reporting. This has proven to be a bad idea for licensees, fearful of heavy-handed enforcement. We ask that reasonable judgment be used to guide and assist businesses into compliance, rather than push licensees back under the rock they have invested their livelihoods to come out from under. We look forward to a future when this industry is treated as it should be, as a vibrant new player in the fabric of Alaska's economy. And in times of fiscal crisis, we be allowed to be at the table to shine a light on what innovation and bravery truly look like. Thank you for all you do, and we look forward to only better days. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ms. Wilcox. Any questions? All right, thanks very much. Anybody else to testify? Sure. That hand back there. Line up and introduce yourself to us.
Good morning. My name is Lisa Coates. I'm a co-owner of Urban Extracts in Kenai. I would like to give you some feedback from the metric workshop that was provided to Alaska licensees last month. One feature that we were shown was the ability to add an additional driver to the transfer manifest. Everyone in my class was excited to hear and learn about it and how to use it. The logistics of getting products from point A to B in this state can be very challenging, and the ability to add a driver is certainly a welcome feature. We were disappointed to find out that it is not available to us. They told us that they just have to hear from the state to turn on that feature. I am here to encourage you to do so. With long drive times on Alaska's road system, it would seem that if any state should have this feature, it is ours. Another item I would like to see changed or modified in metric is the gross package weight measurement now needed for a transfer. When entering the gross weight of the package in metric, there is a drop-down menu that lets you choose if the gross weight is grams, kilograms, ounces, pounds, etc. I would like the state to request an additional choice, units. Product manufacturers sell their products as units. For example, a store orders 30 half-gram vape cartridges. When we deliver to a retail store, they don't ever weigh what we are dropping off. They count the number of units we delivered to see if they match what the number ordered agrees with the manifest. No one places 30 boxes of carts labeled half grams to see if it matches the gross weight. Everyone counts units. I would also like to express my concern over a unanimous board decision at the last meeting in Nome. I was planning to give public comment at the end of the meeting, but the phone lines went down. You approved a product manufacturer to process failed material. My concern is not because it failed for flavis, but because so much time had passed since the failed test result that the product most likely contains mycotoxins that Aspergillus flavus produced. Aspergillus flavus produces mycotoxins, and these toxins do not get destroyed by the process of turning the raw material into oil. The mycotoxin it can produce over time is aflatoxin, which is classified as a level 1 carcinogen, or a compound that is known to be carcinogenic in humans. It is the most toxic classification a molecule can have. There is no safe level. A property of aflatoxins is their molecular stability. They maintain their molecular integrity in temperatures higher than 160 Celsius, well above the melting points of known cannabinoids. In fact, they likely get more concentrated when processed. I was disappointed that not one member of the board even raised a question about it. Knowing the amount of time that had passed since the cannabis had failed, at the very least a discussion about it should have occurred. In my opinion, no amount of concentrate should have been allowed to be produced from these batches to protect the public consumer, but the apparent lack of awareness that this hazard exists is concerning to me. I would also like to comment on the director's report that just came out yesterday, less than 24 hours ago, and it mentions a transaction between Urban Extracts and Lady Grey Edibles. And I don't know if this is the time to discuss it, but that was the first time
Pause that. Do you have any questions about her previous testimony? And then I want to bring up my client for the director's report issue.
Yeah, well, as far as awareness of microtoxins coming from aspergillus. You're probably aware that the board lost its member that had some expertise in that
No,
regime.
I'm not.
Yeah, because I'm certainly no chemist and no biologist, and nobody else on the board is now, so,
Yeah, and that just, to me, highlights a need for somebody of knowledge with cannabis and the whole process from plant to product on the shelf.
Perhaps that would serve as an impetus for us to reestablish the testing committee.
I think it never got disestablished, but, yeah, so your point is well taken on the fact that we may have missed the possibility that this product would have continued to be, containing the aspergillus, and the aspergillus would create these mycotoxins. So thank you for that out to us.
If I may, just a comment. When a product is failed to test and then it's approved as a concentrate, that concentrate then is subject to further testing.
But we don't test for mycotoxins.
Point taken. Okay, thanks.
Janet Waldstein, attorney for Lady Grey and Urban Extracts. We were particularly concerned about the director's report where it mentions both of my clients by name, and then kind of insinuates that there was some sort of diversion. So we wanted to also correct a couple of factual errors in that discussion about Lady Grey and Urban Extracts transactions. First, the note that the Lady Grey repackaged the product is not correct. So this is the package that the product comes in, and then this Lady Grey sticker, this little tiny square, just gets put on top of it. And then I'll let Lisa kind of explain what the transaction was and why we don't think there's an issue with it.
Yeah, it mentions in the report that we took oil and created so many half-gram cartridges from this container, and that there were 10.8 grams went missing, and unclear what happened to the 10.8 grams. Looking into that, nobody's contacted us about this issue at all, but this is a normal procedure of transference where you have a bulk oil and you put it in your instruments to make your cartridges, and there's normal loss in making those cartridges. We will always have loss, and it's just transference of waste. So that should not be an issue, and it implies that it's being investigated. No one's contacted us, and so I kind of take issue with the public director's report implying we're diverting product when we're just doing our normal procedure.
I mean, basically, it's just another example of this is a regulated industry. It's a civil industry. It's not a criminal situation, and this is making kind of a criminal allegation that there might have been some diversion without even contacting the licensee. And so that's what we take issue with, and that's what we just would really appreciate AMCO to be more mindful that business reputations matter. This is a small state, it's a small industry, and the reputations matter, and they have real economic direct consequences. Plus, these are run by, Tasha is a sole owner. She's a sole owner. You have two owners. They're run by families, they're run by people, and it's really stressful 24 hours before a board meeting to see your name in a public document and a negative criminal assertion. And that's all we wanted to point out.
Okay, this was put in here as an example to some questions that the board had over time. It was not meant as any kind of an NOV or an assertion that anything was done wrong. It just I'll let the director pick it up from.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't understand how this can be interpreted as some sort of criminal assertion. The board asked for I brought an issue to the board at the last meeting to say, hey, I saw this thing happening. Is that okay? I didn't say that it was wrong. I didn't say that there was anything wrong with it. It just was an unusual situation, and I brought it to the board as I feel that is my duty to ask the board to consider, is this situation? The board said, we need more details. So I was laying out to them the facts. This happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. So we went from 110.8 grams to 100 grams. The board's going to say, well, what happened to the 10.8 grams? And I don't know. I'm not making any...
Is that the...
And so, may I finish, please?
Sure.
Thank you. So, I found this odd, and in fact, I did send an email to my enforcement staff, and I said, hey, can you contact the licensee and ask about this? Unfortunately, this was written Monday. You know, there were a lot of things going on last week, which I'm sure the industry is aware of. And so this was written Monday. It'd be nice if it had gotten out earlier. I'm sure enforcement hasn't had a chance to call you. There was no allegation of anything wrong. It's just that I can't explain this, and I was sure the board was going to ask me about it because it is something that I can't explain. And so I was noting that I can't explain it.
So just to explain it, it's a lot like making muffins. When you're putting the oil in, it drips. So, I mean, that was the simple answer. Yeah, I don't see how that's necessary.
To read that I'm making a criminal accusation seems really exaggerated.
Unclear what happened to 10.8 grams of marijuana oil. Still looking into that insinuates there's some kind of diversion.
Want to weigh in on this, James? Grab whatever microphone you can find. There you go.
Mr. Chairman, James Holster with EMCO Enforcement. The director did send us an email asking if we can assign somebody or look into the issue of the 10.8 grams, and if this is a common thing that happens with loss of concentrate when it maybe residue sticks to the side of the glass. I have not assigned that to an investigator simply because I think there is a reasonable explanation that we are finding out. We are reaching out to other states to see if this is... If you're not contacted by an investigator, it's because we resolved the issue internally and there's no issue to discuss. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman. In reading, we haven't gotten to the director's report yet, so we're kind of jumping ahead a little bit in the agenda, but since this has come up, I'm looking at the director's report, and there's an item entitled Licensee as Distributor. And the first paragraph is very general and non-specific.
Mr. Schulte, we're still in public.
I understand.
Can we wait till? I mean, they're up here talking about their name or public testimony, and that's it. I think if we want to talk about
my
comments,
the rest of it, Mr. Chairman, have to do specifically with their testimony, if I may.
All right, go ahead.
My question is, could this issue not have been presented in the very objective manner in which the first paragraph does, without leaving out individual business names and products and so forth? I mean, I think that's where this issue, that's the core of this testimony. So the question is, could that not? So why not?
Yeah, the core of our testimony is, if you're going to mention a person's business, it's their small business, it's everything they've invested in, it's all their retirement accounts, all their money that they had, they put into this business, and you're going to talk about it, you ought to give them a chance to respond, or at least give them a heads up that you're going to publicly be discussing them. And I don't think the 10.8 grams was really something that needed to just be thrown in there. I felt like it really kind of made it look like these guys were doing something wrong, and they're not. They're just not.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's check the phones again.
The conference is no longer in listen-only mode.
Okay, if somebody is messing around with the phone, nobody else can hear out there either. So we'll towards the end of public testimony, we'll check one more time. Okay, anybody else in the room that would like to come on up? introduce yourself to us.
Thank you. My name is Barrett Goodale. I'm the cultivation manager for Good Cannabis. Thank you, board, for the opportunity to speak today. I just have a couple of housekeeping things that hopefully can be rectified and just brought to attention. May 3rd meeting here in Anchorage, Chair Springer suggested that waste regulations should be reviewed. Nick Miller requested a project for waste disposal to be opened. And since then, the July, September, and November director's report shows no request for starting a regulations project to be opened. So I just wanted to bring that to the board's attention so that that could be addressed. On July 10th, Jones moved to put the fine schedule out for public comments and then convene a working group to evaluate those comments and bring the report back to the board. When posted for the public notice of this, the website stated that after the public comment period, the board could either adopt, amend, or take no action. There was no mention of a working group going to a working group. It would be nice to know if that was going to happen or not. And also, the type of public comment that's written is addressed differently if it's going to go to a working group versus go to the board. And that's because of the amount of details that are going to be brought forward if there is a working group, like was mentioned earlier with a biological background or biology background or this background or what. If there's a working group, then there's an opportunity to bring those details forward as opposed to a public comment that just might be saying, we want to be involved in the working group. So I just wanted to bring forward that discrepancy of how the public was being communicated versus what the board had actually said. Lastly is there was a notice from AMCO stating that tribal IDs should not be accepted as a valid form of identification to prove age for buying cannabis at retail stores. Within the regulations that they quoted, I believe AMCO is completely correct in how it's written and how they've interpreted, and I understand their enforcement, but I do question whether or not this board thinks that that's how it should be dealt with, and whether or not tribal IDs should be allowed or not. I know that's a potential can of worms, but just wanted to put that issue in the forefront.
Okay, thanks. I will say that if you go into a lot of places, at least like in Bethel, they don't take tribal IDs to buy cigarettes. So, not to disparage the veracity of a tribal ID, but I don't know if you can use them in a liquor store. See people who know shaking their heads. No, you cannot. Okay. I think we're going to have consistency across the board on that. Sure. But your point about working, getting some regs projects is well taken. So thank you. Any other questions?
Just one quick one, Mr. Gazelle. You mentioned a waste disposal regulations project. Was there something in particular about the waste disposal procedures or policies that you were concerned with?
My concerns would be brought to the board if that project was opened. I believe the context was through looking at the marijuana mailbox. There were some pictures sent in of some very looking waste that's mandated to be held for 3 days, and that being in a facility that's growing product that's being intended to be consumed. And I think that's what sparked, hey, maybe we should take a second look at this and try to fix this.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Come on up.
Good morning. My name is Kirby Coleman, C-O-M-A-N is the last name. I just wanted to talk about a big elephant in the room that nobody seems to be taking a shot at, so I'm going to do my best. Pesticides. I know that we've visited this in the past about testing for them and things of that nature. I think that if you guys take a look at the regulations, the draft regulations for the hemp industry sets a good standard as far as where we should start. I think that it should be something that is regulated. A lot of cultivators might not agree with me, but me as a retailer and a manufacturer definitely know that what I'm putting out there, I care about people's public health, and there's a lot of I understand that cultivators, we all have to go with EPA-regulated pesticides and things of that nature that are approved, but keeping people honest is another thing that we're here to do as a regulatory board. So I think that pesticides is something that we should revisit and be on top of and be more proactive about discussing, opening up a regulation project on just starting that now. I know that it takes time and it takes money and equipment and stuff coming up. So I think that if we started the discussions and gone on board with that, I think that would be advantageous for the industry and for the public safety. Also, I wanted to bring up possibly the regulation project of maybe just picking up and having in our own regulations the definition of the word public. As to, I think everyone here can really pick out their own interpretation of what the word public of the state's definition might mean, and we might not all agree with that. So I think it would be good for the industry to know exactly what the board and regulatory staff looks at what is public and what is not public. So I think that we should come up with our own definition of the word public and not rely on the one that the state is very open for interpretation. And then just a suggestion, I was reviewing the regulations, and I only could find one place where it mentioned about a valid handler's permit in the whole regulations. So anywhere where it says handler's permit, it doesn't say that it has to be valid or not. So just a little error in the regulations that I would suggest getting touched up on. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thanks, Kirby. And Joan, you want to tell him what your day job is?
Well, sir, your last name again? Coleman. Mr. Coleman, I also advise the Department of Agriculture, and I've been involved since day one with the hemp regulations. And the person you want to thank for those pesticide review is Rob Carter, who's the state's agronomist. And to whatever degree we can cross-pollinate and have that assistance. I'm sorry, don't I owe you a quarter? I know we'd be happy to help. And if there ever does become a conflict, just so you are aware, between Division of Ag and the Marijuana Control Board on this issue, our department will be able to address that for you and make sure only one attorney is advising each.
Go ahead, Bruce. Mr. Coleman. So you talked about the definition of public, and I can say that was a huge point of discussion with the legislature in 2015 in the context of several bills. My question for you is, in what context do you think that that's important for us to revisit or redefine?
The context that, for me, I could sit at my house, and if there's a gathering of more than 5 people, it could be considered to who wants to describe it as public. To me, that's not public at all. So that's where the state regulation or the state definition of the word public is open for mass interpretation of the way that you feel what's public and what's not.
So you're looking. So the context that you're in which you're viewing this would be public versus private consumption, perhaps, versus a licensee's need to keep their premises private and controlled, isn't it?
More or less on the public consumption end of things, yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted. I wasn't sure which way you're going with that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Check the phone. Oh, coming up.
Hello, Marijuana Control Board. My name is Cody Coleman. I'm the Chief Production Officer for Trike Productions. We're a cannabis-friendly event production company in the state of Alaska. We do quite a bit of community events, but we also do some 21 and over cannabis events. Oh, I don't? Okay. And so basically, just to echo on what Kirby had brought up in the definition of public, in reviewing the current regulations and the statutes, I don't find anywhere in there that would prevent me as an event production officer to allow someone to consume marijuana at a private event, i.e. a concert, much like they do in every concert in the state. Only in this case, we're, again, cannabis friendly, so we're under more scrutiny. But regardless, going back to what constitutes private and public, there are current regulations, I believe, that have been adopted that do define public place, which is with the adjective of place as opposed to just the definition of public. But if you review let's see, Senate Bill number 63, and you go to page 12, page 13, item number 11, it says public place includes A, an area to which the public is invited or into which the public is admitted. So I have a question in that regard, into which the public is invited or admitted. If the place is on private land and you have to have a ticket to get in, does that constitute that it's open to the public, or does that constitute that it's private in the interpretation of the board?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, this is a question for legal. Having participated in a number of similar discussions with the legislature, what I was always reminded of, or I always had to remind myself of, is our limitations as a regulatory board versus the statutory purview of our legislature, and I think that this kind of straddles that line. So I'll put this as a question: does this board have the authority to redefine the definition of public if it's already defined in statute?
I'm not going to look at this right in front of me right now, but in general, when a statute defines a term, we interpret every the statute as having meaning, and it then is incumbent upon the agency that enforces the statute to apply that meaning. In general, when I'm writing a regulation project, or anyone is, and I believe this board has precedent of this as well, if a word is defined in statute, we simply say in the definition section, hemp is defined as, this is defined at 0301 070, or whatever the provision is. Regarding the issue that this gentleman is talking about, I don't have the expertise to assist you at this time. There are legal principles of what it means to be an invitee, and whether you're, still a member of the public if that occurs. I hate to say, lawyers will tell you everything's gray, and we look at everything that interprets that. How easy is it to get an invitation? Are you, in essence, inviting all of the public to it by simply giving them this piece of paper? How much is this piece of paper? I really don't have the expertise there to speak to any particular situation, but to answer your question, lawyers start with what the legislature provided by statute, as do you. I would assume that makes your job easier. Does that answer your concern, sir?
Yeah, it does, and I'm not dismissing or really taking a position on anything you're saying. I guess I'm just acknowledging that it's. I might even support a change. I'm just not sure if we can do it, or if we would initiate it and encourage the legislature to get on board. I think that's a broader discussion, but I appreciate you bringing it up.
So just to go back to Ms. Wilson's comment about public, the section of code 17.38.900, that is the section of code that gives definitions that are quoted in regulation, and the definition of public is missing there.
All right.
Meaning that there is nothing defined as to what the board sees as public. But again, going back to the House bill, it quotes public, quote-unquote, place. So first identifying if there's a difference in those two interpretations, and would it be accurate to say that the public place would take place of definition of what public means?
One thing I neglected to say is if a statute is unclear or ambiguous, and if there's a matter of agency expertise, and in this case there's board expertise, the board does get to define terms. Now what you do is look at a variety of things. How is this term defined in a statutory chapter? Does that definition help? Is it meant to apply to this section? I don't want to write you a treatise right now, or the board a treatise right now, but there is the other half of legislative history is where the legislature hasn't said something, they're in essence saying we are trusting the administration to define that status in a way that's compatible with statute. So, and if the statute is silent, then the board's going to have a little bit more leeway in defining that to achieve the purpose of the statute.
Okay, and so my question would be, or more of a request, is that, am I able to make a request to have that definition added to the section of code?
We have the very, some of you who follow the history might recall, the very first regulation that was written for marijuana was the public consumption regulation. That was written prior to the creation of the Marijuana Control Board by the Alcohol Beverage Control Board, who was sitting essentially as the marijuana board. So, how that would go about being resolved, I think we've sort of talked about that in the past, and it's something that we may, but you know, the ABC board is the one that wrote the regulation defining public consumption of marijuana.
Mm-hmm. So I appreciate your comment on the fact that it was drafted prior to the MCB board being created, and I'm certainly not asking for you guys to come up with a way to condone or give permission to have consumption. But if I refer back to section of code 17.38.121, which would be the powers and duties of the board, it says the board shall control the cultivation, manufacture, and sale of marijuana in the state. The board is vested with the powers and duties necessary to enforce this chapter, period. Hence, missing that you guys really don't have the regulation or control over the consumption of marijuana. So again, I'm not asking you to condone public consumption, but if I'm going to pursue, whether it be via a permit that gets created or another mean of allowing public consumption, I want to be clear on where the board stands on, again, putting on a private event and allowing someone to consume marijuana at that event.
Well, 1738 is statute.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that was what the legislature wrote. That described.
That was the ballot.
Some of the ballot initiative, yeah, and then the legislature also wrote a bill. But nevertheless, though, I guess maybe the ballot initiative left out public consumption. So it goes back even further. I would say, you know, look at your legislative history. Okay, look at the legislative history of Senate Bill 63, which is the tobacco bill, the smoking bill, and that's Title 18. So look at the legislative history in that, and see if you can discern any, you know, crack among legislators about their feelings towards the definition of public consumption or what a private event might be. But really, we kind of have our hands tied by dint of a couple of statutes.
I think I get where you're going with this. Having attended my fair share of Grateful Dead concerts back in the day, I can appreciate both the value and the pitfalls to this approach. And where I'm going with this is legislative involvement. You might do well to contact your House rep and your state senator and just say, hey, this is kind of what I've got in mind. Is this something you would get behind? And I think you would have to define it. Our ability to regulate is pretty limited. The license types we're able to offer are very limited. And over the years, there's been discussion about expanding that authority, and that authorization would have to come from the legislature. Mm-hmm. But it is limited. If you could get the legislature on board with it, the analog that comes to mind is, we've probably all been at a number of events at Eakin Center and elsewhere where there's a wet area, where people can consume alcohol. Potentially there would be such that kind of thing for cannabis, 21 and over, so forth, at larger events, that some would view as public. Maybe I'm just, the tree here, but I think pursuing it with the legislature would be a really good next step for you. And you know, maybe this board would weigh in on that. I don't know, but I think that'd be a really good next step.
Just to comment on that, and not to question anyone's experience on the board or intelligence, but let's not play dumb that every event, quote-unquote, major concert that happens in the state, there is public marijuana consumption that does take place, just as there is alcohol. So just pointing out that there is nothing to reference to that there's an issue that has arisen from someone being able to consume at a concert that I'm aware of. More or less, you know, people getting DUIs, going home drunk. But nonetheless, going back to the House bill that you mentioned, and it pertaining to smoking tobacco, again, going into what is it actually regulating, and it just says the prohibition of smoking, right? So if you go to Section 1835-301, an individual may not smoke in an enclosed area in public, including an enclosed area. And that whole section of code goes through basically defining where you cannot smoke in an enclosed area. And so I'm curious, in your opinion as the Marijuana Control Board, is there anywhere outside of this section of code that bans smoking outdoors?
If I may, I'm just gonna voice to Mr. Springer's reaction, because I think we all share it. We as a board can't really give you an official position on that right now, because there's no motion been made, no discussion had, and so forth. So it's really constrained in how we can support or oppose any kind of suggestion. If you take it up with your legislature, I can see this entire discussion becoming a very public one, as it probably should be. And it's, you know, there's going to be a lot of people supportive, a lot of people opposed. You know, you did pass, not by huge margins. So, you know, and I would hope that since then some people have become more accepting of this. But you know, what you're saying might be just, you know, one more big step that well, this board can't weigh in on it right now.
And I can appreciate that the position that you're in, to have that stance that you're taking. But in counter, looking back, the board was able to have an event that did take place in the state fined for allowing public consumption. So if you're able to enforce the regulation of banning it, I would hope that you could have input in regulating the possible, you know, legal, whether it's through a permit or other means, but allowing consumption. Again, highlighting there was an event that did get fined that was, I believe, spearheaded through an investigation that the board initiated.
I just got a quick question for you. Does the state still regulate concert promoters?
In what sense?
The state used to have they used to regulate concert promoters, have a license to be a promoter. Yeah. Do they still do that?
Right.
So if there's a set of regulations for that, you might want to look at whoever rates those regulations, probably the Department of Commerce, as a possible venue worth a quarter to, I don't know whether the concert regulations say anything about alcohol consumption at an event, but you might want to look at that as a way kind of to sneak towards the legislature and not let us have to worry about it so much.
Okay, well, I definitely appreciate your time, and I just want to commend you guys on all the issues that you guys deal with, and you guys have a lot on your plate, and you guys have done a phenomenal job up to this point, allowing feedback from us as the public and moving forward different issues that we've brought forward. So thank you for your time.
Oh, thanks. We appreciate that. Okay, anybody else in the room that would like to testify? All right, Starship Enterprise is still firing its guns on the phone line.
The conference is no longer in listen-only mode.
Okay, this is the Marijuana Control Board. We are looking at anybody out there on the phone that would like to testify under public comment to the board. Go ahead and speak now. Okay, we're not hearing anybody out there, so we'll turn the phones back off.
I have a comment.
The conference is now in listen-only mode.
Then we'll close public testimony, and given the size of the crowd, we will take about a 15-minute break.
The chairperson has disconnected. The conference will now end. I know you need sex, baby. Come with me and can. Welcome to the GCI Conference Center. Thank you. Please stand by. If you are the chairperson, press the star key now. Your conference will begin when the chairperson arrives. Please wait. chairperson has not yet arrived, please try your call again later. Welcome to the GCI Conference Center. Please enter your... Thank you. Please stand by. If you are the chairperson, press the star key now. Your conference will begin when the chairperson arrives. Please wait. You will now be placed into conference. There are 36 participants in the conference.
Okay, let me get out my little portable gavel here. It's 10:46, and thank you, appreciate that. We're back on the record. Public testimony is over. Anybody else wants to testify, you go to the hall and testify among yourselves. So how loud it gets, so thank you. All right, we're moving on to tab 3, which is the director's report. Director McConnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Our local government specialist, Judd Smith, left AMCO at the end of September. We will be refilling his position, but need to update his position description before that can be done. There are 2 issues that the board asked to revisit. They brought to the board's attention in September, and the board asked to revisit them at this meeting. One was a question of quality control sampling. The board adopted a regulations project in late 2017 that allowed a cultivation facility and a product manufacturing facility to provide samples of their products to their employees for quality control testing with certain limitations. Come to my attention that a product manufacturing licensee transferred their product to a different product manufacturing licensee, who then distributed the first licensee's products to their employees for quality control samples. I asked the board whether this was acceptable at the last meeting. The board discussed the issue and requested that it again be on the agenda for further discussion. If the board determines to open a regulations project to further clarify this issue, I recommend considering the following changes along with whatever clarification you intend to provide. 1, that it be stated that samples may not be distributed to employees for quality control until they have passed required testing. 2, that if the board determines that a licensee may provide product to a different licensee for the second licensee to provide quality control testing, then you should remove the prohibition on giving the product to another licensee that exists in 460D4 and 557-4. So that section in each place would just state, quote, no sample provided under this subsection is sold or given to another consumer. And 3, that a time limit for the return of the quality control form should be set. If the purpose is for a licensee to determine whether a product is reasonable to take to market, the employee testing and feedback must happen promptly. Would you like me to pause so that you can discuss that at this time?
Yes, please. Anybody got any thoughts on this? I'd say we should probably have a reg for that. I think quality control was something that we put in early, and I like that. That we should require that samples of whether it's bud and flower or refined product have been tested prior to being provided as samples. So.
Mr. Chairman,
yes, go ahead.
Just out of curiosity, how many pending regs do we have out there?
I'm asking. And not everything on this list has come back to us. On this list.
Some open projects have not been, an initial draft hasn't been provided to the board. Some are in the process. Some got referred to the testing committee and haven't been addressed by that committee. There's a variety of statuses.
Well, let me ask, if I may, Mr. Chairman, let me ask this: is this an ongoing problem for which we?
Through the chair, Mr. Schulte, I found this situation and I brought it to the board to ask whether it was okay. So that was all I was asking. I think board members stated on the record that that was not their intent when they created that regulation, but that they weren't necessarily sure they had a problem with it. So I think it is not clear, and how the board decides to deal with that, either through a regulations change or through adopting a statement today, I think that's...
Have any NOVs been issued that relate to this?
Does, quality control samples appear in metrics, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And when, for example, it says a product manufacturing licensee transferred their product to a different product manufacturing licensee who distributed employees, that transfer between licenses appeared in metric?
Yes.
Okay. We've got it tracking. It is being tracked. You know, right now there isn't necessarily a rule that says that you can't just, you know, harvesting, you're done curing, hand samples out to your employees prior to it being tested. And, you know, that may or may not be an issue. Some people might say, well, you know, caveat emptor, you know, I know what I'm growing is good, and my employees have seen it grow, and they shouldn't have any problem with it, which, you know, is that still, you know, in the interest of the public health and safety? So I don't know. But it's if we don't open a project in this right now, it's certainly something that we should continue to consider, because it does, you know, potentially open some avenues that could, you know, come back either to the cultivator or manufacturer or to us.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
I would move to open such a regulations project, and if I can get a second, I would like to speak to it further.
I'll second that.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I would support that. In general, I'm inclined to not have further regulations at this point. However, this one appears to be a clarification of an existing one, and the reason I think it is important is this. If this activity is going on, and if there is not clarity on what is expected of the board, from the board of the licensees, then it's open to interpretation. And I think we've got evidence to suggest that that's no longer acceptable. So for that reason alone, I would like to open a regs project, put it out for public comment, and then see what the licensees have to say.
It's been moved and seconded to open this project on quality control sampling. Any other discussion, Mr. Miller?
I agree with Mr. Schulte. If you read the regulations, it is quite clear that you're supposed to give the sample to an employee, and you're not supposed to give it to another licensee. So the regulation does need to be changed. Regardless on the guidance we give today, the regulation needs to be updated.
Very good. Any other discussion? Not hearing any. All those in favor of opening a regulations project for quality control sampling signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, there you go.
Thank you. The second issue that I brought to request board guidance at the last meeting was about whether a licensee can sort of act as a distributor for another licensee, and you asked me for specifics, and I brought you specifics. The issue was a product manufacturing facility creating vape pens, sending a metric package of those vape pens to another product manufacturing licensee, and then that second product manufacturing licensee repackages in metric, so not necessarily putting in different boxes, but repackaging in metric to distribute those vape pens out to retail stores. Perhaps, and there are no allegations that this is improper. I just didn't know if this was the intent, as I know there had been discussion of back at the beginning when the regulations were first discussed of having some sort of distributor license or wholesaler license and that sort of thing. So I asked the board for guidance on this issue.
Okay, thanks. And this is the time, and I think I've used the F word before about regulations, that it would be nice to have a flow chart that shows how things operate within the regulated environment, how product moves from licensee A, licensee B, licensee C to the consumer. And this is certainly an instance where we, should be able to draw a line from one regulation to another regulation, showing that it's in compliance. So, Okay, are there any questions for the director on this one? Mr. Jones?
Mr. Chair, I was just trying to remember back, as you read the regulations and especially as you read the applications, most of the narrative in the application when it talks about moving product, a cultivator says that they would move up to a 5-pound batch if it was going to a retailer to be repackaged, so basically wholesaling it. But if they don't, they have to comply with the packaging in terms of, less than 1 ounce, has the right label, has to be tested. We talked about that a little bit with product manufacturing when how you'd package a concentrate for wholesale versus how you'd package it to go directly from the product manufacturer to retail. This seems to be a slight variation in that this in essence is packaged that could be sent to a retailer as is, where the retailer might then put a label on it saying, this is from such and such a manufacturer, sold by such and such retail store, but it's not really repackaged. So this would be going from a product manufacturer to a product manufacturer and then to a retail store. Could end up with 3 labels on it, which maybe for a consumer doesn't matter, but most products I buy has 1 label on it, not 3. So I think it would be confusing as to, where it originated, how we might track it through metric if there was a problem with it, how we, understand who did the testing and when. If this is tested at product manufacturer A, it goes to product manufacturer B, gets relabeled, goes to the retailer and gets relabeled, nobody knows if anything in between happened to make certain it would be retested or not. So basically, by the time it got to a retailer, the testing would have been done at product A manufacturer, and it could be 6 months before it hits a retail, depending on, I guess, what the product is or how fast they sell or things like that. So it concerns me a little bit that if it's just putting on another label and manufacturer B actually had nothing to do with the manufacturing of it, I guess that's a business decision whether you allow somebody else to take credit for you even though they don't do anything to it. I think if they do anything to it, we have some issues, but unless it's a concentrate, then they put into a brownie or a cookie or something like that, which then has to be retested. So I don't know exactly what solution or issue that I see here, but I don't think we contemplated this kind of exchange or transfer when we talked about how products move. We did contemplate a lot of others, but certainly not, product A in a box and just gets another label on it and then gets moved on. I'm just concerned about sort of a chain of custody, what happens to that product. If it's just a label versus it's, something else has been done. So that's just sort of my concerns to talk about.
Thanks, Mr. Jones. Mr. Schulte.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, question for the director. Does Metric have the ability to track products in this fashion, going from cultivator to manufacturer to another manufacturer to a retailer?
Yes, although it's not always clear what happens, and I think the discussion that we had during the public testimony was a good example, that it wasn't clear that the repackaging from the 110.8 grams to the 100 grams was putting oil into a cartridge. That is not always understandable through metric, but the product going from licensee to licensee is tracked in metric.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Jones made the comment that, I'm paraphrasing here, that this had not really been contemplated when the regs were originally adopted. I've been in the room at the time. I share that perspective. But looking back on 4 years ago, we didn't know, frankly, we didn't know where we were getting into. We didn't know how this industry was going to evolve and how these different licensees were going to interact. I think there was sort of a supposition that we weren't addressing all possible combinations, and clearly this is one of those. So I see this as an opportunity to clarify in regulation what the industry is trying to do in a licensed fashion, and I would support some clarification of this and an opportunity for these businesses to weigh in and say, okay, here's how we want to be able to do business, and as long as we can ensure public safety, why not?
Through the chair. Being a retailer, I can tell you we put our store stickers on product we sell all the time. Number one, because we need to identify the retail facility and its license. The product, in the example we're talking about, that was, I guess, made into oil did come from Lady Grey. So this is a branding issue. And I don't think clarification as long as we have a lot of other regulations, I think, that need a lot of work. And I'd hate to waste time on this just because I don't think it goes against the regulations, and Metric has the ability to track this product from start to finish. And so, I mean, me putting a retail, our name and our license number is not repackaging it, in my opinion. So I think we're just adding the information that are required by the regulations, and for those folks who have cultivations and they want their name out there for branding, and that's what was used to make the oil, then I think that's perfectly acceptable.
Jamie? I'd just like to agree with Mr. Miller. I don't see any concerns with this. It's their business model. As long as the tests are valid, we don't need any ambiguous regulations. So.
Okay, thank you. Gee, they never applauded Pete. Maybe they did.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. Moving on, Chair Springer asked me to provide information about what proficiency testing is available. I am aware of 2 companies that offer proficiency testing for marijuana, Emerald Scientific and Finova. I did attach information about what tests they offer that I took from their websites. It's possible that there are other companies that offer this, but I wasn't able to find them. So that's attached to this report. Chair Springer also asked for some testing statistics, and so I've provided, sent from program inception to October 25th of 2019, the number of tests that have occurred, the number of failed tests, and the percentage of failed tests for your review of the various types of required tests.
I'll just say that for the most part, it looks like there are some failures there. But if you haven't seen this list, take a look at it. I think probably the industry can, in some cases, point to the fact that there is some pretty good product being produced.
The next Marijuana Control Board meeting is scheduled for January 23rd and 24th of 2020 in Juneau. Applications must be complete, and any other documents for the board must be submitted to our office by January 3rd of 2020 to be on the agenda. I've attached, as usual, your sales statistics and tax statistics for the last 3 months. Please note that, again, the taxes are those that are assessed from licensees who filed returns, not necessarily all assessed taxes.
Yeah, so that does not include local sales taxes, or does that include local sales
Does
taxes?
not. This is
That
the
is
state
not.
excise tax
Oh, dear.
only.
I think I might have spoken my letter to the governor. Maybe not. Okay, so just for those listening at home, total retail sales from program inception to October 31st, $338,232,311. And total taxes assessed from people who filed their taxes for the same period, $35,992,675. So, obviously, the industry is a significant economic player in the state, and thank you for that. Now let's talk about metric.
Mr. Chair, the metrics listed along with the industry generic user guide and the Alaska supplemental guide was my desire to provide you with more sort of some, expect you to review all of this here at the meeting. This is really sort of to take home and look at in all your spare time.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Shuley.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Director McConnell, we've heard through testimony, there's a couple things that stand out. I mean, three that come to mind. The first one is it sounds like there have been changes to the metric system requested by AMCO staff that are not necessarily coming from regulation or from direction of the board. So could you speak to that first?
At times, the staff has requested changes to metric that the staff determines would help with regulatory compliance. And one of the changes we requested was about trade shows. I think there was discussion at the board. There's been discussion of the gross weight changes. We did request, trying to find it in here, the removal of the ability to create packages out of thin air. That was something that got violated frequently, and there's no reason to create something from nothing. So that came from us. I don't recall whether we've had any other requests. I'm looking at Mr. Holscher.
If such a request was made of Franwell, would that be documented somewhere? I mean, would a licensee know that AMCO had requested Metric to make a change to their recording system, and if so, why? I mean, what would be the underlying impetus for that request?
I think sometimes Metric communications imply things coming from the state that haven't always, and we've had a discussion with them about being more clear on their bulletins, what is being requested by the state versus what is just a new feature that is provided by Metric. I would have to do more research to document requests from the state, but certainly those would be in emails. They wouldn't be things that are available for the licensees. The licensees would get the information through a bulletin.
Okay, thanks. Bye. And again, we've heard through testimony today and at the NO meeting that suggests that Metric and their staff are, well, first of all, that they're not tailoring, they have not tailored their system to the Alaska regulations. And I was on the board when that contract was first launched. My brothers wish there was such a plug when we were kids. So where I was going with that is it kind of looks like Metric sold their system as being customizable and specific to our state. I mean, certainly that was the message that I recall when the contract was originally let. But it sounds like they're really not doing that. They're kind of giving us a one-size-fits-all solution and putting our licensees in the role of guinea pig. have you talked to Metric about that? And I mean, is this an accurate conclusion, or where are we at on that?
Through the chair, Mr. Schulte, obviously I was here when the contract was created, so I can't speak to that. I can certainly inquire more about customizations versus what is standard for other states. I am aware that like we've talked to Metric about a product ID number. The board has discussed having a product ID number, and we've talked to Metric about adding that into Metric. They do that in other states, so obviously they are able to do things for one state and not all states. But I don't know the kind of parameters of what whether that can only be done about certain things or that cannot be done about everything. I don't really know the outlines of what's possible.
And one more question. We already talked about a users group, so I won't belabor that point. When is the contract with Metric up?
I believe at the end of fiscal year 2020, I believe. So that would be June 30th of next year.
And are there other contractors that have expressed an interest in getting that?
I haven't heard from anyone expressing interest, but we would have to put out an RFP.
Yeah, but I guess that would probably generate the interest, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And just, I don't think that in July of 2015 we had anything to do with letting the Metric contract out. I don't think we received any, correct me if I'm wrong, we didn't receive any, we didn't have any contact with the Department of Administration the Division of Administrative Services who let the contract out. We knew it was going on, but we didn't have anything to do with speccing it. We never saw, as far as I recall, a copy of the contract. The board had nothing to do with either selecting Framwell and Metric or in, negotiating the contract with them. So we're taking what we get. Yeah, more or less. Yeah,
no, I agree with you. We were definitely kept at arm's length, and that's fine.
That's
I don't
correct.
object to that.
That's fair.
But, now with benefit, now we've had 4 years of operating the system, and clearly there's some issues with it, and so I would hope that going forward, I would hope that a users group will be established at the very least quite soon, so that we can articulate and compile some of the main objections, and then communicate those to Metric, and the state would use that in evaluating any future contracts with this vendor. I mean, I'm not saying to use them, but I'm saying we need a system that works.
Sure, and maybe could we invite the Division of Administrative Services to either come to our next, at least correspond with the board, let us know what the term of the contract is and what their plans are for, whether there's a clause in there for automatic renewal or whether, anything they can disclose, what their plans are for, after the contract is up.
Sure.
Okay. And on the user group idea, obviously, we want representatives of all 4 license groups, and probably a couple of folks from the office. So I guess if you can noodle that out and input from the board, right to the director on how that could get laid out, I think would be helpful. And I would, if there's a motion that we establish a Metric users group and leave it to the staff to put it together, I think that'd be fine.
I would like to make a comment, then I'll make a motion. Number one, the one comment, and I'll stop talking about this user group. I think it's very important that someone from enforcement participate in that user group. They are the ones who have most of the communications with the licensee when there is a Metric problem, and just the amount of time that would be saved in the office and for the licensees if we could get this right and everybody on the same sheet would be tremendous. And then I just want to clarify, at our last meeting, we discussed changes going to Metric, that before AMCO sends a request for Metric to make a change, that this board have an opportunity to review it and approve it as well. And so we did do that. All right, so now I'll make the motion that we create a user group for the Metric. I would love to see that happen in the next 30 days. I do think it's that important.
I will second that.
Okay, moved and seconded. You wanna say who, how the industry should be represented on there? I mean, just at least the 4 license groups.
There definitely should be, a representative from each license group. I also believe that there should be an administrative person from the office and someone from enforcement.
Okay, that detail's fine with the seconder?
Yeah.
Okay, fine with that. Any discussion? Okay, not hearing any discussion, all those in favor of establishing a metric users group, made up of representatives of each of the, license categories, administration and enforcement, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, good-o. Stepping back for a second, when I used the F word, it dawned on me that maybe there's an opportunity to see if a University of Alaska business student or somebody might be interested in doing a process flow analysis of our regulations. So just, you know, if you know anybody at the university or the School of Business, I think it would be really good. It'd be helpful for everybody to, you know, have those go and no-go points in there. We'll see what bottlenecks might exist, and maybe it would be helpful in regulation reform, and I think it'd be helpful, you know, for everybody, because there are 6 sections that, 6 or 7? 6 sections. 9, I'm sorry. A day late and a dollar short. There's 9 sections of regulations that all, one way or another, tie together, and if you're a licensee, the only way you can really get those tied together is to hire one of our fine members of the bar to help you out. So, just something to think about. Okay, moving right along. On metric, the next one is a resolution resolution of the Marijuana Control Board in recognition and appreciation of Assistant Attorney General Harriet Milks. Is there a motion to adopt this resolution?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you. And I'll read it. Whereas Harriet Milks started as board counsel for the Alcoholic Beverage Control Board in 2012, and whereas Ms. Milks quickly developed expertise in Title IV and 3 AAC 304 and an understanding of the alcohol industry and its place in the lives of Alaskans, allowing her to capably and competently advise the ABC Board in its responsibilities in protecting the public health and safety, and whereas AAG Milks represented the ABC Board during years of significant change, including a multi-year project in the legislature to rewrite Title IV, and handling multiple appeals of board decisions to the Office of Administrative Hearings, including one case which went all the way to the Alaska Supreme Court with the state. Whereas with passage of Ballot Measure 2 in November 2014, Harriet became a key member of a small team of state officials educating themselves on medical and recreational marijuana programs in other states in anticipation of the legal, regulated marijuana industry in Alaska. And whereas when Governor Bill Walker appointed the first members of the Marijuana Control Board in 2015, Harriet Milks was there to provide wise counsel and advice as an entirely new set of regulations were developed and implemented through the licensing of retailers, cultivators, manufacturers, and testing laboratories. And whereas the Marijuana Control Board came to rely on Ms. Milks for everything, should be from the interpretation of nuance to advice on matters which, as played out, successfully ended with decisions proposed by the Office of Administrative Hearings, and whereas Assistant Attorney General Harriet Milks consistently and professionally upheld the highest standards of the legal profession on behalf of the State of Alaska Department of Law, now therefore be it resolved by the Alaska Marijuana Control Board that the Assistant Attorney General Harriet Milks is recognized and honored for her years of dedicated service to the people of the State of Alaska and to this board and to the Alcohol and Marijuana Control Office. That's the resolution. All those in favor of the resolution signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye. Are we gonna have any discussion on this, or?
Sure.
Now, the reason I ask is, you know, she was here 1 minute, she was gone the next. It was such an abrupt departure.
Mm-hmm.
Was there any ethics violations, or
No.
was there any reason behind her
No,
leaving?
no, there was not. It was, I have my own speculation as to why it happened, and it was absolutely nothing to do with that. It was a decision by the Attorney General to change Assistant Attorney Generals.
And if I could add, I did write a letter to her supervisor requesting an explanation and got no response.
Okay.
I do have a comment.
Go ahead.
Without getting too deep into specifics, I disagree with some of the assertions in this memo, this resolution. Thank you. That's the word I was looking for. So I'll be voting against it.
Okay, that's fine. We got to unplug us again here. Okay, is there any other discussion on the resolution? Okay, then all those in favor of passage signify by saying, or adoption signify by saying aye. Aye?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay?
Nay. How many nays was that? That was 3. Okay, all right. Then the resolution doesn't pass. Okay.
Mr. Chair, are you going to take public testimony on this?
No, we weren't planning on it.
Okay, because it's my understanding that you're supposed to take public testimony on agenda items.
I thought it was the number.
Yeah.
I thought it was...
The public testimony period at the beginning of the agenda is for items that are not on the agenda, because when those items on the agenda come up, that's the opportunity for public testimony to be taken. That is my understanding. I only worked there for 7.5 years, so.
Yeah, just to clarify, when we do a licensing action, we look if there is comment for the public on a license. Just voted on this resolution, and so we're moving to the next agenda item.
All right. I will look into the legality of that. Thanks.
Okay, moving right along to the Enforcement Supervisor report.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, members of the public, licensees. My name is James Holscher. I'm the Enforcement Supervisor for Alcohol and Marijuana Control. If it's all right, I kind of like to share a little bit of some feelings on, there's been a pretty rough past 2.5 hours. And I'll start off with saying that regarding my culture and my personal beliefs, a lot of, working with who I am enforcing, who we are regulating, I've never taken the stance of mistreating anybody, and I think that my enforcement staff has understood that and has taken the same notion that we treat people with leave their respect and dignity intact. I have not received one complaint about the actions of one of my enforcement officers on anybody being mistreated. I want that on the record, that nobody, not one person, has made a complaint on the actions and behavior of the enforcement staff regarding any marijuana contacts for any investigations. And I've been doing this since 1994, since I was 18 years old, and I can say I supervised quite a bit of people. And I've supervised some bad people, some people who have done wrong, some people who were overbearing, some people that did use their authority to mistreat people. And that is one thing that I've always been against. I do not, and I will not, ever promote anybody being a bully. With that being said, the current six investigators that you guys have working for AMCO have presented themselves to me as some of the most professional, polite, and I could say thoughtful people that I've ever worked with. And I know we're not going to satisfy everybody. I absolutely know that. I don't live in this la-la land where everybody appreciates what we do and everybody thinks what we do is great. And I understand we make mistakes, but we do try to correct them. With all of that being said, some of the angst that
and the licensee might feel when contacting us, I would hope to maybe dismiss some of that by saying, I am very open. If you ever have a complaint about any investigator's actions or conduct, I will openly look at it as evidenced by my past actions when I received a complaint in the alcohol realm about an investigator. It was looked into very thoroughly, and it was unfounded. And there was evidence that showed that the reason why we made that decision. I do not take lightly anybody in enforcement mistreating anybody. With that being said, nothing has been provided to me to show that that has occurred. So, moving forward with that, I would hope that the licensees, when we talk about self-reporting, continue to self-report, simply because that is the ethically correct thing to do. If you receive a violation, it has been discussed numerous times with the board in the past that we will notate that it was a self-report, in hopes that the board sees that and recognizes that and maybe has a reduced fine, reduced violation. And I could say that kind of comes and derives from some of the wildlife laws that we see within self-reporting. But the fact is we have to document those. We don't have the discretion to not report certain things to the board if there is a violation. Enforcement feels that we have a responsibility to accurately report the violations as they are occurring. Because they are violations of current regulations, we don't have a stance, we don't pick on individuals, we don't hold grudges towards licensees. We are just simply enforcing the regulations that are before us and the statutes. So I wanted to make that statement prior to moving forward on my report. I think it is very important because we sat here probably for the first hour and a half of the meeting, and a lot of the comments were negative or reflected a negative tone of enforcement. And I would encourage the board to reach out to licensees and see if that is the 100% reaction that you would get from licensees and their contact with enforcement. And I would venture to guess that you guys are going to find there's a much different attitude, that if you talk to people one-on-one, you will find that we are down to earth, understanding, and very, very respectful when we deal with our licensees. When we are conducting investigations that may involve some criminal conduct, the tone of the investigation definitely follows with what the tone of the individual is doing. And I can say that sometimes when you build up a rapport with an individual or the way the conversation is heading, that often dictates how an investigator is interacting. The difference between that is how they react afterwards and towards them in a different manner. So thank you for letting me speak on that. Aside from my board report, I think it was important. And if any of the board members have a comment or a statement based off of my statement, I'd gladly listen to them.
Well, I probably have some questions, but I'll wait till your report's finished.
Thank you. So, AMCO, we had a vacated investigator position in Fairbanks since June, the middle of June. We've went through, I think, 3 separate hiring processes, and we ended up hiring an individual, Harry Lee Conway, to fill the special investigator position in Fairbanks. Investigator Conway has 20 years of law enforcement experience in Tennessee and 4 years of experience in the military. He most recently served as a police officer for the city of Tullahoma for 17 years. Achieving the rank of sergeant in his department, Investigator Conway holds a current police officer certificate from Tennessee Police Standards and Standards. We're currently working with APSC on his transfer for his recertification class. He will be given certain other classes and training when he arrives here in Alaska next week. So we hope to fill the gap that's been left so we can provide better service, inspections, handler cards for licensees and the public in Fairbanks as soon as his investigation is filled. And I want to point that he's a prime example of us trying to fill an individual as a team member who is very respectful and vetted, that he we feel that he would be a good fit for our team and treat people properly while at the same time doing his job. As you can see from the statistics that I've provided, the enforcement activity, there's two columns. The one on the far right is from January to the end of October, and the one on the left in the orange or the pink is from the end of August to the end of October. I don't have anything that I feel like I should expand or explain on that. They're pretty self-explanatory, but I will answer any questions if there is any concerns or questions regarding those numbers.
Any questions? Go ahead, Mr. Lee.
Just one, if I may. So I was looking through this last night, and my question is, we're looking at the relative distribution of alcohol walkthroughs, inspections, NOVs versus marijuana walkthroughs, inspections, and NOVs. I don't know offhand how many licensees there are on the alcohol side.
Approximately 2,000.
Okay, so it's about a 2-to-1 ratio.
About a 1 to 4, 25% maybe. There's about 300 some odd marijuana licensees, 2,000 alcohol licensees.
Okay.
And what you're seeing right there, and if you're asking why the NOVs for the marijuana are much higher than alcohol.
I wasn't challenging.
Okay.
I'm just trying to put it in perspective.
And I guess part of something that I should clarify is a lot of those are non-payment of taxes.
Okay, go ahead.
I've provided a pie chart that kind of shows the flow. The alcohol board kind of talked about some of the numbers, and they talked about proactiveness, and I just want to remind the marijuana board and the licensees, if you take a good look at the contacts, the calls, and the emails that enforcement in total, 8 investigators, 1 criminal justice tech, and for the latter half of the year, it's been 7 investigators and 1 CJT. We've dealt with, and this is not including individual emails as well, this is just to the general inbox, 12,550 contacts, calls. That is a huge number, and a lot of that is us talking to licensees prior to them making a mistaken metric or helping them fix a mistaken metric, which I want to remind the board, a lot of times when this is immediate and they report it to us, there's not a violation that is issued. If we understand that mistakes happen, and there's a difference in enforcement when somebody makes that mistake and immediately calls us and say, this has just happened, I hit the enter button when I shouldn't have and it just happened, versus it happening a week later, a transfer already occurring, and so forth. So we have to take all of those things into consideration when we are writing these NOVs. But I want to assure the board and the licensees that we absolutely strive to be as proactive as possible. The only thing that I currently have and a request for clarification on right now is exit packaging. The board previously determined that the opaque packaging of marijuana or marijuana product can be separate in an opaque paper bag when a customer exits the retail store or the establishment. Recently, because of the plastic bag ban and everything else going on, people have wanted to reduce waste, packaging, and so on and so forth. They've asked quite a bit if a customer elects to place a marijuana or marijuana product in a personal bag, example, a recyclable bag, or a personal bag or pocket like a purse or on their person in one of their pants pockets or jacket pockets. With your guys' previous opinion, does the board find that this practice would be acceptable if the marijuana or marijuana product is out of public view and secure?
Through the chair. I would say this has become a big issue since the plastic ban bag, and it's going to get bigger as more communities do this. We have customers all the time want to put it in their purse, their backpack, in a zipper pocket in their jacket. And I think the reason we want it out of public view and secured is because we don't want, you know, maybe youth or someone seeing it who's walking by or in the car, whatever the reasons are. I do believe, as long as it's out of public view, secured in a pocket or a backpack or a purse, that is sufficient. It's unbelievable what a 15 or 10 cent charge for a bag will make people do, but they just don't want to pay for that bag, or they may not want to take it, to just be honest.
Any other comments?
I agree with Nick.
Mr. Chairman, I do not disagree with Nick at all. Just as a matter of process, though, I hate to even suggest this, but I would rather see us refine this regulation than simply take a position and say, okay, forget what the regs say, here's what I do. That I think has been a recurring problem, where there's an interpretation of regulation. You know, there's a small group of people here today, but there's a bunch of people running their businesses that have no idea what we're talking about right now, and they would have no way of knowing that a change is in the works, and so they're gonna get seemingly random feedback from enforcement or from somebody else. So just as a matter of process, I would, particularly when we're referencing a specific part of the regulations that I think I wrote, I'd rather see us revisit this and fix it appropriately, so that somebody can open this and say, that's what I can do, or that's what I can't do.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, good.
I absolutely agree with that. I agreed with that when you guys made the paper bag determination. I asked that the regulation be changed to remove opaque or separate if that was the case. So I absolutely agree that making this regulation sensible, understandable, and very clear, especially for the licensees and enforcement, it will create less problems in the future.
How urgent is this problem? I mean, is this something that is like getting people hung up every day like this week? Or, I mean, if we open a regs project and this took 90 days, is that sufficient?
You know, I went to, I think, about a dozen retail stores a few weeks back, just walking through, talking with the licensees, and I got to witness a purchase in every single one, and it occurred in every single one. And
I would like to say it's urgent. Customers get upset, and I mean, it's a big deal.
That was my point. It's occurring, it's happening right now, so I would say that this should be dealt with, or at least something saying that this is going to be going into the works, and this is an acceptable practice until that regulation is passed.
Okay. I actually periodically go and visit retail stores, just kind of see how the industry's doing, and I've kind of witnessed the same thing. In fact, I asked somebody one night, I'm like, so packaging? They had no idea who I was, and I wasn't challenging them. I was just trying to understand how they were doing their business. So I get the urgency. So maybe, if there was a board position taken today, I would just like to follow it up with a regs project so that long term we could codify whatever today.
I don't have any problem with going either way. I certainly don't have any problem with interpreting 3AC 306 345 3A3, which is what we're talking about here. This is marijuana or marijuana products sold. The retail store shall assure that marijuana or marijuana products sold is packaged in an opaque, resealable, child-resistant packaging when the purchaser leaves the retail section of licensed premises. Now, most packaging is that already. Whether it's a box with a vape cartridge in it, or whether it's something bought off the deli rack, right? It's in a sealed package. It's essentially child-resistant, and putting it, everybody, especially in Anchorage, they're carrying their own grocery totes. They should be able to put that in their pocket. So interpretation-wise, I don't have any trouble with giving enforcement the leeway to interpret that if the customer has a opaque device, whether it's a coat pocket or their tote bag, that it's not a problem. And then I think if we're going to revise the regulation, it should be a very simple revision. It doesn't have to be, comma, or semicolon, to include a customer-provided bag or on the customer's person. So, I think they're asking for some interpretation to run with right now, and
I would just say, I think the challenge is maybe 75% of the packaging for marijuana is opaque, child resealable, blah, blah, blah. There's a percentage of packaging that's child resistant, resealable, but you can see through. And that 20% or whatever the number is the challenge, right? And those are the items we should let people put in their backpacks, their purses, their pockets, whatever. It's the other 75% that we don't have to worry about, but that 25% is causing a lot of consternation out there right now.
And as soon as they leave the premises, it's their property and it's not subject to our authority, and they can wave it around. They can say, look what I just bought.
So, going back to when we were first developing the regulations, at one point, the draft regulations included a requirement that every single product on the shelf or a display case had to be in an opaque, resealable, child-resistant package. And there was a lot of public comment in opposition to that. The argument was, well, this makes the packaging itself, super expensive. So the solution was, okay, well, individual products don't have to be child-resistant if they leave the store in a package that does meet that requirement. So, and as I think, as you said, a lot of the retail stores now are just packaging vape pens, bud, concentrate, whatever, edibles, in child-resistant packaging. So they've kind of voluntarily gone back to what the draft regulation actually specified. So it's almost redundant to take a child-proof opaque package and put it in another child-proof opaque package to leave the store. Am I on the right page so far? Yeah. Okay. So recognizing that incongruity, I would support some interpretation that allow them, if the individual packages are, meet the requirements of this reg, then whatever they put it in leaving the store is more open. Am I on the right page here, Nick? Okay. I don't think I expressed that as a motion, but I think we're going in the right direction.
Okay, so are we okay with advising enforcement and the director that as long as as they walk through that door, the product that they just purchased is in some sort of an opaque container, pending our development of an additional regulation or a regulation amendment. All right, is that good? Okay. All right. So you got anything else there, James? Yeah, a couple of things.
I'm done with my report.
You're done with the report. Okay. All right.
Can I let to speak on the NOV?
Yeah, sure. Well, go ahead.
I guess we keep talking about NOVs are the only way to communicate with licensees. I assume because this board has that is the communications when you have a violation. I don't think we're considering what the effects of the NOVs are on businesses. As everyone knows, there was a bank in town that had decided to start serving cannabis businesses. One of the first questions I was asked, do you have any NOVs? I was lucky enough to say no, but had I had one, regardless of how minor it was, they weren't going to give me a bank account. I can only imagine once the insurance industry figures out that there are NOVs out there, that they start reviewing them and assessing your risk based on NOVs. And I hate to say that out loud. But there are unintended consequences with these NOVs. I would say from AMCO and the board perspective, most of them are not that big a deal. But we're not considering what that does to the business when they go out to try to get other services. So if that is the only communication that the board has given enforcement to communicate problems with licensees, then we need to consider fixing that. It's just going to continue to affect businesses negatively going forward, and an NOV is a lot bigger deal than what we believe it is. So. I'll just leave that at that.
I can say I appreciate that, and I can kind of confirm that with alcohol, insurance companies do contact us for violations. So I understand that that concern is real. Enforcement is only there to report what violations occur. Our intention is not to exasperate things, make them appear worse than they actually are. If that's our only mechanism, where I think we try to address this with a fine schedule, which is much, I think, can be viewed in a lot better ways than a violation, a notice of violation to the board, to bring to the board, where it can be resolved at a level of paying for a smaller fine when that never amounts to the level of a notice of violation. I think that that really should be thought about and considered with what you just said, and not only take into the context of, oh, this fine schedule is bad because these amounts are bad. If you look at what they tie to, ask yourself, if you're a good business owner and you're really trying your best, will enforcement understand that the violation that occurred, that they're trying to tie a huge violation to, would not be understanding of that? I guess what I'm trying to say is selling to a minor is one of the highest thing on the fine schedule that we talked about. We haven't had one reported incident of that happen yet. And I can say that the monetary value attached to that, or fine attached to that, is huge, as is the consequence. But if you look at the low frequency, high fine things, that is one of those things that very rarely would occur. And we believe that because we believe, for the most part, we do have licensees that want to comply with regulations. So I agree that violations in itself, bringing to the board, does kind of paint a picture that it may be worse than it actually is, but when that's your only mechanism, that's your only mechanism.
And I would like to, maybe the board start thinking about another mechanism. So I think it's important to the industry.
Okay, yeah, go ahead, Bruce.
Mr. Elster, first of all, thanks as always for all your hard work and for being here. I know this morning was undoubtedly stressful for you, and I appreciate that. It's hard sometimes to take that kind of feedback. But I wanted to talk to you about it because I read through the marijuana mailbox last night, and honestly, some of the feedback from the industry is pretty scathing. One of the arguments when we were promoting, when I was speaking on behalf of this initiative in 2014, one of the goals, one of the hoped for outcomes was that we would encourage black market operators to go legit, to get a license and to have legal marijuana businesses. I realize there's not a lot of hard numbers to go by, but in your estimation, do you think we've achieved that?
Honestly, no. I think that, and I'll be honest and say that I think there are some licensees that dabble in both licensed marijuana and black market marijuana. I think the black market is still still plentiful out there for a lot of variable reasons, cost being number one. We rarely receive feedback or complaints that we can provide to the troopers, and not only that, we don't have the prosecution that we would like to see towards marijuana or sales of marijuana. And one of the things that I've talked about that I personally feel was a mistake was when Title 11 adopted our definition of marijuana. The criminal aspect adopted the civil definition of marijuana. So in a nutshell, marijuana transports out to western Alaska, and I know this because this is where I'm from. This is something that I still communicate with law enforcement out there on a personal level and on a professional level. Dabs or concentrates are a very common form of drugs that are being transported out to the villages for sale, for illegal black market sales. And it's very common for law enforcement to see sheets and sheets of dabs, which are a little less detectable. Some can have no scent if they have a concentrate manufacturer that removes all the terpenes. And if there's not a dog that's trained to hit on something that concentrate or something that residual concentrate would leave, those can be transported unbeknownst to law enforcement, the airlines, and everything else. Yet, in the criminal world, prior to the adoption of the new marijuana definition last year, those were considered a Schedule 4 drug as hash oil in the criminal industry. Now, we've kind of muddied the water, if you will, where that is not considered a felony or a different classification. So you got people who are making concentrates out of marijuana that are, there's no prosecutors that are going to take them for intent to sell or whatever it may be because of that law. And when you have multiple individuals transporting 1 ounce of marijuana where they say it's legal, 1 ounce of marijuana out in western Alaska will net 28 grams at $50 a gram. That's quite a bit of money. So it's still lucrative for a black market dealer to continue to do this because, number one, there's very conflicting definitions in the marijuana statute. There's very little enforcement of black market marijuana. There's very little prosecutors that would be willing to take a marijuana case if we brought one to them. So we're kind of at the very beginning at a loss. So I think that the tools, I think that things need to be thought of in this. If the legal industry wants to combat some of the black market, these things need to be brought to light. And some of the things that black market individuals are doing to harm selling untested products, who knows what's in them. We know that public safety is one of our number one priorities. And when you have black market dealers who are not regulated, they don't have any testing. As flawed as our testing may be, at least we have some.
If I make it, because you kind of touched on the core of my question. So I don't know. I don't know what percentage of black market has gone legit. I have to wonder, though, do you think that the current regulatory environment encourages black marketers to want to jump in?
Reword that question.
Well, so what I'm getting from industry representatives and individual licensees is a fairly elevated sense of frustration, and a lot of them finding it difficult to be successful, frankly, in the business. And I have to wonder if there's a black market person out there, if they're paying attention to this, they're looking at it because these guys are their competition. I have to wonder if that black market operator is looking at this going, yeah, I want some of that, or no, I'm not getting anywhere near that.
I would imagine it's the latter, and not all of it's put on enforcement. A lot of it from the application process to the criminal history check, everything that the hoops that need to be jumped through. And not only that, but when you get the license, the compliance of the regulations that are set forth by the board, when you have somebody acting and doing criminal behavior and you ask them to follow a set of rules, there's going to be a harsh resistance to that. It's human nature. Somebody generally is not wanting somebody that's in enforcement in their face telling them you need to do this because they've never had to deal with that in the black market. So, I guess my question would be, would anybody feel uncomfortable with that?
If I may just kind of pivot to another question, because this goes back to your earlier testimony about investigations and so forth. When you're, and this is kind of a question because I'm trying to understand how you guys function as opposed to like APD or state troopers and so forth. When you're investigating a licensee, when you're investigating an infraction for a potential NOV, is that, in your view, a criminal investigation or a regulatory infraction?
We approach it with, given the information. If it's a regulatory civil violation, that's how we approach it.
Okay.
If there's criminal aspects to it or something that could possibly be criminal, we have to follow those rules. We've been called on evidence, handling evidence, that type of thing, and it's always better to follow the more strict rules, which is a criminal procedure in that. But when you talk about people and how you treat them, we don't treat them different regardless.
if you go to a licensed premise, for example, and you're investigating something you feel is a pretty egregious violation of regulations, do you certainly you identify yourself, you show your ID, do you then advise them of their rights?
No.
Okay, and that's...
It's not a custodial situation. They're not under arrest. Why would I have to read them their rights?
Okay. Would you tell them if you're investigating something that could result in fines or suspension of a license or something like that, would you or your staff, would the enforcement inspector typically advise them that they have a right to an attorney before they answer questions?
That's not been said. I mean, criminal, yes, they would have a right to an attorney. If they want an attorney, they can get one. I mean, so we believe that licensees as well as enforcement should be open to conversations and communication. Every time we make a contact, our intention is not to catch them in, oh, I gotcha, and, send them off to the board with a whole list of fines that in hopes to get their license taken away. I think we're treading some serious territory when the board or individuals are saying that we should be required to tell them they need an attorney when that requirement doesn't exist. Well, absent of a criminal charge or being in a custodial situation or being under arrest. I do not feel comfortable being in a civil position saying, hey, you can have your attorney here before these questions. That could be their choice. And if they get approached by one and they say, I don't feel like I need to talk to you, I want my attorney here, so be it, let them. We'll report that to the board and remind them that business records, if we're asking for aspects of business records or how they keep track of metric and everything else, that would be a violation in itself. So it's a very complex issue, and I'm not going to press my investigators to say, you need to tell them that they can have an attorney present if they want. It just does not meet that criteria where somebody needs an attorney in the civil aspect of things. If it is criminal, as I said, and we talk to them, my very first words to them, if they agree to meet with me and talk to me, my first words out of my mouth are introducing myself, telling them, you're free to leave, the door's right here, you don't have to talk to me if you wish. That in itself is a non-custodial situation. I don't have to read them their rights. If they want to get up and leave, that's their choice. I'm not going to hold them. I'm not going to handcuff them. But there's a lot of misunderstandings about Miranda rights and what needs to be read. I think people watch too many movies where they feel like any time an investigator or a cop talks to them, the first things out of their mouth is, you didn't arrest me. You didn't read me your rights. There's a whole quantum of things that need to be considered when you're reading somebody their rights. And when we deal with a multitude of civil violations, not criminal violations, we're not required to tell them that they have these rights to remain silent. Anything you can use can be used against you in a court of law, so on and so forth.
If I may explain it, the whole reason I'm bringing this up is the board has been reminded a number of times that the enforcement staff are law enforcement officers. Many people, for different people, that means different things. If an APD officer approaches me and begins asking me questions, I have the right to know why they're asking those questions. And there's a point at which I can say, hey, you're an officer, I like it, or if my neighbors are, all very cool people. But I have an opportunity to stop the conversation and say, hey, you know what? I think I kind of like to have a lawyer for the rest of this conversation. I don't feel that right is as obvious. Just from some of the things that I've read and heard, I'm not sure that same dynamic exists. That it's clear with these licensees, and we've been asked over and over to grant authority to enforcement staff, and yet it seems like sometimes they enjoy all of the authority of law enforcement without being encumbered by the legal processes that other law enforcement agencies are.
I'd like you to point out one incident where maybe one of my investigators was overbearing or over-authoritative, and I can probably say without a doubt that rarely, if ever, never occurred. Right. So now with that being said, it is not about us enjoying and having this authority. If the alcohol board and the marijuana board have the expectation that we are going to investigate the criminal aspects aside from our licensees, and you expect us to deal with ACDC or somebody selling alcohol in Bethel, taxi cab drivers, restaurant owners, or so and so forth, selling things outside their back door, and you want us to be able to approach those in a criminal aspect, in a criminal matter, or if we get a licensee who has committed a crime like fraud or anything else, and we are the investigators for that, and we have the tools or the recognition necessary to charge those people with the crime, that's when that authority kicks in. You got a mixed bag of things. I mean, it's very difficult, and, you know, I guess the simplest way I can say it is, you know, there's a lot of regulations out there based off of statutes. Some regulations are simply violations and not misdemeanors, not crimes, so they fall into the civil realm. And you get police officers dealing with that all the time, writing a speeding ticket. That is not a crime, it's a violation. You know, there's certain aspects where law enforcement, regardless of where they work or who they work for, act in multiple capacities of dealing with criminal and civil aspects. And I think that if you cut a hard line and say, oh, every time you talk to an AMCO investigator and your first words out of your mouth are, I want an attorney, how do you think that's going to play out?
Well, I can't answer that. Let me ask you a slightly different question. Different topic, really.
We're moving forward, but we haven't resolved this issue. I mean,
well, no, but
let me interject here for a second. One of the reasons that we have our individual seats is because we bring some expertise of one sort or another. We have public health representative, we have industry representative, we also have public safety representative. So, Chris, do you disagree with any of James's description of law enforcement dealing with a civil situation? For example, if you walked up on me as you're a Fish and Wildlife trooper, and I've got one extra salmon in the pile, are you, the first thing you're going to tell me is you have the right to remain silent and you can have an attorney if you want, or are you going to say, hey, you know what, you've got too many salmon here, I'm going to write you a ticket for it?
You know, everything that Mr. Holscher explained, he's following all the standard principles of interviewing. I mean, they're not custodial interviews. They're not, you know, they're free to leave. They're not in custody. They don't have handcuffs in or on. So everything he's mentioned is correct. You know, there's I think a misunderstanding with the licensees of what their rights are, but everything that he's explained is correct. So.
Well, if I may then ask my next question. So several years ago, I think it was probably late 2016, maybe 2017, I don't know. You came to the board and presented them with a quandary that you had identified. That was the regulations were incomplete, or in some cases unclear, and you asked the board to clarify, and you and your team found themselves in a position of having to enforce not just the regulations, but sometimes subjective interpretation of those regulations. And the discussion, and it sparked an extensive debate amongst the board members. And at the end of that discussion, the board chair, Pete Menard at the time, basically just said, yeah, okay, just keep doing what you're doing, which was making subjective interpretation of the regulations rather than the regulations, which I found concerning at the time, frankly. So my question for you is, do you think you're still in that position? Does your team still find itself having to enforce interpretations of the regulations?
Absolutely not. And I recall what you're talking about. It stemmed from that little place that was open on the peninsula that was they were trimming marijuana out there, and we asked if our authority extended outside of licensees, and we cited the public consumption where it was expected that we would write tickets for public consumption to members of the public, and we just wanted that clarified. And there was not only a decision, the board voted on it, and if I recall correctly, we asked for clarification that enforcement have enforcement powers. The interpretation was that enforcement powers were also towards members of the public as well. And if I recall, you and Brandon Emmett were the only two who voted against that. The other three voted for it, saying that we do have enforcement authority on non-licensees.
I think we're actually talking about a different meeting, because I wasn't on the board at this time.
Then, you were here since I was here. This happened in 16, 17. And as a result of that, I do remember, Chairman Malarnick making a comment about a specific thing about, one of the regulations about interpret it in that way. But as you can see, if you've read the history of my reports, anytime there's ever been a question as to any of the interpretations that I have, I don't make that up. I don't do that on my own. I bring it to the director if there's a question. If she doesn't know, then I bring it to the attorney. At that time, it was Harriet. And if it still isn't known at that time, I bring it to the board as recommendations or clarification.
So as a matter of policy, it sounds like you're saying that if you're in a position of having to enforce an interpretation of regulation that has not yet been clarified by the board or identified in regulation, then you would get direction on that from the director.
Or the attorney or the board, depending on if the director knew about a past interpretation at that time. And mind yourself that this was at the beginning of marijuana, where there was things discussed prior to me getting here that I had no idea about, and they would be brought to the director, to the attorney, then to the board. Generally now, if there's no consensus or we can't understand a regulation, I bring it to the director and I say, this is too ambiguous, I need clarification, and I put it in my report.
Okay, are there any other questions for James? Okay, not seeing any. It's about 12:10, so let's break for lunch till about 1:15.
The chairperson has disconnected. The conference will now end.